When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be doing a chapter analysis of Renly's Peach. And before we get into the video, I did want to take a little bit of time before going into this video to talk about just a little bit of the things that have been going on for the last week. And I wanted to just say a massive thank you for the people that showed me support. I did a community post talking about how I was going to be taking a break from YouTube. You guys probably didn't notice it too much just based upon I already had week videos planned, and then recording I didn't really have to do for a while. But I have kind of taken time away off of YouTube for a little bit, for like a week or so, just to kind of get my mental straight. But yeah, thank you for the people that gave me a lot of support in that post. If you guys did not read it, I basically got out of a breakup, and it was my first relationship. So yeah, it's been a little rough on me, but we're back, and we're going to be doing a chapter on Renly's Peach. This is a chapter I've been wanting to do for probably about a month now. I just felt like there was always other chapters other people had more interest in, or other videos, and I'm finally going to get to it. And this is probably one of my favorite chapters of the entire story, and I really love a lot of the implications this has on the rest of the story, even though it maybe seems like a minor chapter. As well, before we get into this video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel reach other people that like this content as well. And let's get into the video. So this chapter kind of starts with Catelyn being the first one to come to the meeting place, as we're kind of at Storm's End. We're, not like in the castle, but we're, outside, around where Stannis has kind of been encamped. And the first thing we kind of notice is that Stannis has cut down all the trees to make siege towers and catapults to kind of assault Storm's End. Now, what I think is interesting is that Stannis was even planning to do this because there was really no chance he would take Storm's End, and if he did, he would lose so many men. But it's interesting to see that he was at least preparing for this, to show that, he would do this if it was necessary. And what I think is also interesting that we kind of talk about this is, again, the negative effects of war. And we're seeing that this natural environment, the trees here, Catelyn kind of thinks to herself, how long have these been standing for? How long have these been here? These must have been here for a very long time, and to see them being chopped down is kind of a very sad and bleak start to the chapter, showing kind of the despair that this is a very important meeting, that if these two can kind of make peace, we can end the war. And Catelyn is even questioned why she's even at this meeting, right? It's not her affair. She's not for Renly or Stannis. She's kind of here as a neutral person, although she has been encamped with Renly. And Catelyn really is one of the few people that understands the significance of being here. If she can make this peace, like I just said, they can have, the war will be over, right? There's not gonna be a war. If Renly, Stannis, team up, and then they make a peace with Robb, and Robb bends a knee or whatever, this is over, right? The war will end. They outnumber the Lannisters heavily. There's no real other alliances the Lannisters can get. This is it. The war would be over. And we kind of see that that's the main focus of this chapter, is Catelyn trying to make these two brothers have peace. And she talks about, or not talks about, but she thinks about how hard this is going to be, because Renly and Stannis are two very different people, as we'll come to see in this chapter. And what I think is really interesting is that we also get some kind of background information before we get this meeting, right? And we see, Storm's End. We see its description, and we see it's very strong, very tall. Its walls are thick, and we kind of understand why that is, right? Because King Duran, who was the first real, king of the Stormlands or whatever, he had kind of fell in love, or taken the maidenhead of the daughter of the sea god and kind of the wind. And we see that because he ends up, taking her maidenhead and all this stuff, she becomes kind of mortal. Or when she becomes mortal and gives up that life, her parents get mad, and the gods kind of destroy all of these castles that King Duran builds. And by the 7th castle, he keeps rebuilding these castles, trying to make them stronger. He builds Storm's End. And this ends up being either because the Children of the Forest helped, or Bran the Builder kind of instructed him of how to do it. We're not completely sure. There is no definitive answer on Storm's End and how it was built. We just know that the 7th castle finally is the one that is able to withstand the terrible winds and the tides that come in with Shipwreckers Bay. And Catelyn kind of continues to describe how thick the walls are, like I talked about, and how tall the walls are, and how almost unnaturally smooth everything seemed to be, where no wind could really get into the castle. And it is very an interesting kind of read if you ever do look at Storm's End and stuff like that. But getting on to the meeting and getting back to the main central point of this chapter, we see that 2 figures start to head toward this meeting place, and Catelyn infers one is Stannis, who she is correct, and she knew that Renly would be the second to come to this meeting. And Renly's logic is the other person that comes first will have to wait. And kind of just playing these little games that are just very tedious, and you can see that Renly treats being a king almost like a game, that this position of power, he really, it's almost a game to him. Like, Catelyn kind of constantly reminds him that they are playing at war while Robb is, you know, doing war. And that is something I think is very interesting on the demeanor of Renly kind of in this chapter, where he just kind of continues to play games with Stannis and slight him. And Stannis, we know from his character, doesn't play games like this. He's a very straightforward person for the most part, and he doesn't really care about, oh, who's getting to the meeting first. It's something he's very different from Renly. While Renly plays the political game, Stannis is not someone who likes to play it, but will play it when needed. And that's kind of the first big slight we already have towards the Stannis camp. But Renly, again, just showing kind of how immature he really is. Now, another thing Catelyn notices as Stannis kind of approaches is, one, Stannis, his whole flag is very different from Renly's, where Renly's is kind of, you know, taking the traditional crown stag type flag, very golden, while Stannis is taking the other flag of kind of the red god, the flames, with a little, you know, stag for the Baratheons, and then the crown stag, a little one, but it's very much encircled with this kind of fire and stuff like that. So Catelyn notices that right away and kind of sees that this is very interesting, and it's something we know that Stannis, this really was not a good move, because it isolated a lot of people that might have wanted to maybe come to his side because of this religion, and kind of seeing him more as someone that was supporting cults. So yeah, that's one thing. Now, the second thing Catelyn notices is that Stannis is dressing very plainly. He's not wearing very much like king's garb. Like, if you look at Renly is dressed very fashionable, very high class, while Stannis, he's wearing kind of worn stuff. He has worn boots, you know, a leather jerkin. It's very, very much not kingly when you look at it on Renly's side of the thing. But Stannis, to me, this fits his character perfectly. He doesn't care as much about what he's wearing. He doesn't care about looking the part as much, while Renly is someone that cares about that a lot more and making these appearances and being very kingly, while Stannis, on the other hand, is not that. And this leads to our first kind of interaction between Catelyn and Stannis. As Stannis kind of approaches, he just goes, you know, Lady Stark or whatever, and it's very chill tone in his normal kind of Stannis-y way. And, you know, Catelyn responds with Lord Stannis. Now, this is already kind of an interesting way of starting this conversation, because Stannis is very much the rightful king, right? And she does not address him by King Stannis. It's very much Lord Stannis, which makes sense because the North and the Trident and all that or the Riverlands are, you know, not going to be part of the Seven Kingdoms anymore. But it is something that's interesting, because really Catelyn should be acknowledging Stannis as a king, because he should be the rightful king of, you know, maybe not Westeros, but the 6 kingdoms, I guess, at this point. Or not even 6, 5 kingdoms. So it is interesting to see that she is trying to, I guess, stay neutral in this conflict by not calling either king, but it is interesting when Stannis is the elder in this situation. And Stannis, kind of instantly goes, in a kind of awkward way, kind of goes, I'm sorry for Ned's death and all that stuff, but he was no friend of mine. It's like, who says that? Like, why did you add that in? Like, Stannis is someone that really struggles with social interactions sometimes. And this is definitely one where I'm like, what? Why? Like, why can't you just say, I'm sorry for your loss and just end it there? But no, he has to basically like go, yeah, but he was no friend of mine. So, I mean, And then Catelyn, playing off this goes, well, he was not your enemy either. He did help you when you were, had a siege at Storm's End, enough that he was the one that relieved it. And Stannis kind of fires back, right? He's just kind of like, okay, but why didn't he do this at any point before, at any point of the war? He did this because Robert told him to. And he really did not have any love for me at all. And Catelyn continues on this kind of thinking. And after that, Stannis kind of goes, I should have been the king. I was always dutiful to Robert. And we kind of see again in this chapter how Stannis very much felt slighted by his brother on multiple occasions, and that's why he really did not have a good relationship with either Robert or Renly. And it kind of shows that, right? Where Stannis believes he should have been Hand, and he should have been Hand. It made the most sense for Stannis to become the Hand. Stannis was Robert's brother. He had been in his service for, the whole time. He had been in King's Landing. It made way more sense for Stannis to become Hand than it did Ned. And Catelyn, responds with, he never really wanted to become Hand and all that. And it's just like, yes, but he took it, right? That's Stannis' kind of response to this. And it's a really interesting kind of back and forth because you can see both people's side of this, where Catelyn kind of looked at Ned in this situation with Stannis' relationship and going, okay, well, he always did help you out, and stuff like that. And he, was not trying to intentionally slight you, Stannis. He did try to help you by sending the letter and stuff, and he declared you as the king. It is interesting to see that these two characters are already kind of sparring with words before Renly's even gotten here. And when Renly gets here, that's really when it really just amplifies. And Stannis kind of continues with going, I will get vengeance for Ned and stuff like that all the same, and that I will send you your daughters back. And that's kind of what Catelyn asks, she just wants her daughters back at this point. She, all this killing and stuff, it won't really bring Ned back and all that, but she wants Sansa and Arya back if that's possible. And when Stannis says, I will send them back to you, Catelyn takes this as are dead or alive, basically, which I think is kind of funny in the chilly tone that Stannis has, because I don't think Stannis probably intended it to be that way. I think Stannis probably did mean it to be like, if we find them and, all that, we'll send them back to you and all that, because he really doesn't have any need of Sansa, I guess. So I don't understand why he would kind of try to threaten her like that. But yeah, so we continue on. And Catelyn kind of questions why Stannis is even here. Why are you at Storm's End when you're, you could be at Dragonstone, you're right next to King's Landing. Why wouldn't you just attack then? And it's quite obvious that Stannis does not have the manpower to do that. And Stannis answers her. He frankly just goes, you are kind of right to the point, Catelyn, but I need the support that Renly has on my side. And Catelyn kind of tries to start the peace negotiations here, where she's like, well, all of these people are kind of sworn to House Baratheon and Robert. If you guys were to make a peace, with Renly, then you'd be good to go. And Stannis just doesn't understand this, right? Stannis does not get this. Stannis is always a very loyal brother to Robert, someone that did, everything for him because he was his older brother. And it's the complete opposite. Renly is doing nothing to help Stannis. He is being a very bad younger brother in a lot of regards. And Stannis just doesn't understand that, because Stannis is very honor bound. He does his duty and all that stuff, that he really does not get why Renly would do this. And Stannis kind of says that his quarrel is not with Renly. He needs their lords, not Renly. He needs the support of these armies so that he can retake, King's Landing and all that, and kind of start this inevitable war on King's Landing. And Stannis kind of comes back at Catelyn going, why are you here with my brother? Have you already kind of sided with Renly? And are you bending the knee to Renly? And Catelyn kind of does the whole, well, he's king of the North and, you know, all that stuff. And that he doesn't bow for anyone, but he extends friendship to all. And this just isn't going to work for Stannis. You know, anybody that knows Stannis' character, Stannis believes he is the rightful king. He deserves kind of respect and stuff like that. And he also says, you know, there are no friends when you are a king, just subjects and enemies, which, you know, is not a great political mindset to have. You can always have friends that can gain you more political power, like Renly does with the Tyrells. So to me, it's a bad way of thinking, but it shows you kind of where Stannis' head is at this point and how he is as a character. He's someone that is won't break on certain topics and things like that. So Catelyn does pick up in this chapter, and this is when we inevitably see Renly kind of come into the fray. And as you know, I'd mentioned with Stannis talking about the enemies and subjects as a king, Renly goes, and they also have brothers, and he kind of, you know, pops in, and we know the very big difference here between Renly and Stannis. Renly looks the part. He comes in looking like a noble, like someone very high class, with, you know, this flamboyant kind of look to him, and he also looks like Robert, so he fits the part. And it's the very stark difference between Renly and Stannis. Now, Renly and Stannis' talks kind of start with the whole idea of Renly just continuously taunts Stannis. This really is not a peace talk. It's not anything like that. It's really Renly kind of just taking a piss on Stannis, right? You know, and Renly, he almost starts with like, is that really you, Stannis? Kind of maybe talking about his, you know, how he looks and stuff like that, his aging process. Because Stannis is someone that is going bald. He is someone that does not really look like a young man. And also, you know, as we talked about earlier, his sigil is much different. And Renly kind of starts to, you know, talk about it, you know, it's very different, and it'll make the battle, you know, easier to understand because there'll be different sigils and all that stuff. And Stannis kind of, you know, starts with his famous line, right? The Iron Throne is mine by rights, and all those who deny it are my foes, or whatever. That kind of, you know, famous line. And Renly he just snaps back. And it's the continuing taunting of Stannis, where he just starts going, no one wants you as their king, right? Old men don't want you. You know, people in Dorne don't want you. The people on the Wall don't want you. No one wants you for their king. And we kind of get to this difference in ideology between the two characters, right? Stannis is someone that believes in kind of the normal kind of system where the crown would pass from, you know, this male to, you know, the next. If there's no heir, like if they didn't have any children, it would go to the oldest brother, and it would continue down that line in kind of succession. Now, Renly does not believe in that because it doesn't fit his kind of agenda. It doesn't fit where he would become king. So he goes for more of take it by force, who has the largest army, and two, who wants them to be king, right? All these people want Renly to be king over Stannis. And it's a very interesting ideology difference that we have here, because both in their own right are wrong, right? Because having a larger army and kind of being the one where people are like, you know, this is who they want to be king is not really right, again, because even in that system, right, the people really are not choosing. It is really the High Lords that are looking to make alliances with Renly over someone like Stannis. It's not really the people who are choosing. And if the people were choosing, they would probably not even choose Renly or Stannis. So it's this stark difference of ideologies where, you know, Stannis, and we talk about the line of succession and all that stuff with that type of thinking, it also doesn't work, because as we see in Targaryen history, or even this history now, there becomes so many issues with who is the legitimate heir if, you know, certain things don't play out right. You know, we can look at past decisions in the Targaryen, history with Rhaenys Targaryen and Viserys. And we can look at other situations around Rhaenyra and Aegon in the Dance of the Dragons. So we look at all these situations and they both lead to problems, right? Because neither one is really for the people, neither one the people gets a say. They're both very flawed ways of thinking. But if we kind of go off of what has been set upon and has been a president in Westeros for the last 300 years, Stannis is the rightful king in that type of thinking. But again, both of these kind of are flawed, right? Both are looking to, well, I wouldn't say both of them are looking for power. I think Stannis is doing his duty and what he thinks is right and what he thinks he deserves. While as Renly, I do believe this is kind of a power play, and he's been kind of been whispered in his ear by the Tyrells and all this. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, both these people should be setting apart their differences and maybe having this idea where let the people kind of choose who they want for their king and all that, but they would never do this. And that is the problem with this kind of system where the nobles and the upper class and the lords really are the only people that have any type of say in those situations. So we kind of see the flaws in both systems, but let's continue on with this kind of talk and seeing, you know, what more Renly is going to taunt Stannis with. Continuing on, we kind of see Catelyn talk about, you know, while, you know, we're arguing and acting like children and all this, Tywin is regathering all of his armies after, you know, Jaime's been defeated and Robb has won a few battles. All of these armies are starting to kind of reform, and they need to unite and destroy the Lannisters. They're the one foe all three parties here have kind of as an enemy. And Renly just being immature again and being so just oblivious is like, yeah, Robb's won a few battles, but I will win the war. And it's like, yes, I get it, you have a large army and stuff, but Robb is single-handedly taking on the Lannisters. Nobody else here has even been in a battle yet. And it's just interesting to me to see how Renly, his thinking is in this chapter, and kind of analyzing how he's kind of playing with, you know, not only Stannis, but Catelyn as well. And Stannis was someone that really didn't want to have this meeting in the first place, you know, because Renly being a king is already a slight to Stannis, and he says, you know, straight up to Renly, do you have a proposal? Do you have something we can settle with as a peace or not? And that's where we continue on. So continuing on, Renly just goes, yeah, no, no, definitely not. You can bend the knee or whatever, and you'll be able to, you know, keep, you know, your position and whatnot. And Stannis is just not going for it. He's like, no, this is dumb. I'm the rightful heir. And Renly kind of goes, well, you serve Robert, why won't you serve me? And that's such a dumb question coming out of Renly's mouth, and really shows how these two brothers were not close at all and really have no understanding of the other, right? Because why would Stannis ever serve you, Renly? Like, he did that because Robert was his older brother. He was very duty bound, right? And Stannis, his whole problem here is Renly, he thinks, you know, you should be doing what he did for Robert all of those years. And Catelyn just kind of sitting there has enough of this and just goes, you know, if you were my sons, I'd lock you in a bedchamber until you remember that you guys are brothers and all that. It's Catelyn very much kind of saying something that, yes, is very logical, but at the same time is just not, it doesn't work for these two type of characters, right? Something like that doesn't make any sense to say, because these two really aren't brothers. They haven't interacted like brothers. They're not like what Bran and Rickon are, or Robb and Bran, or Robb and Jon. They're not like those characters where they have a bond. There is no bond between the two of these characters. So Stannis kind of just goes, you know, no, Lady Stark, it's not that simple. I am the rightful king. I'm the elder, and that, you know, Robb will get his time soon, right? He's a traitor too. And it's like, Stannis, you're isolating yourself from a possible ally when you almost have no power at this point, right? It's just a continued of Stannis is not good with social interaction and not good at making friends, because it's like, you've now said two things now to Catelyn where it's like, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, why are you antagonizing Catelyn when she really is here just trying to make a peace between the two of you, and that's it? So it's again that interesting dynamic of Stannis not being great in social situations. Now, Stannis, you know, this obviously angers Catelyn, and Catelyn kind of responds with, well, here's the thing. You say you are the rightful king, but Robert had 2 sons in Joffrey and Tommen. And this is what I love about this chapter and this world building is in a lot of other books and stories, all of these characters would have this information already, right? Stannis sent these letters off, and we're just expected that everybody would know this already. And Catelyn doesn't know that. Catelyn does not know that Stannis put this letter out and all that. And what I think is really interesting is the way that Renly actually uses kind of this letters against Stannis, right? Because Renly, I think, does believe this to be true, right? I think Renly does believe that they are bastard born. I think Renly was a very smart character when it comes to political stuff, and I think he figured it out, right, with Ned and all that stuff. But for me, what Renly does is he twists it. He says, it's awfully convenient, Stannis, for you to say this because it would make you the person in line for the throne. And it's something to think about because motivational wise, it would make sense. But I mean, if in reality, if you know Stannis, you know he wouldn't do this. He's not that type of person. But it is very interesting when you think about how Renly kind of twists these letters against Stannis. And Catelyn in her own mind kind of questions, is this true, right? Would, you know, Cersei be so stupid? And she is, and we know she is. But it's that interesting dilemma where Catelyn kind of sees it. You know, she starts to kind of weigh if this is true or not. All right, if you're wondering why I changed clothes, it is actually the next day after I was recording. I had a lot of stuff to do, but yeah, we're back. Now, the next part of this chapter I want to focus on is as we continue to talk about are Robert's children legit, and Catelyn kind of reasons this in her own head and stuff like that. We also have this idea that Stannis was never really close to Robert, and it's explained a lot more in this chapter where we kind of have this idea that Stannis kind of knew from the get-go, and he'd already pieced this together a while ago. And Catelyn kind of questions why wouldn't he go to, Robert right away? And we kind of see that Robert and Stannis were never really brothers. It was more kind of a duty thing by Stannis, and that if Stannis had been the one to tell Robert probably would not have listened. This would have been seen as, Stannis trying to climb the line of succession and all that. And it shows you how little trust the two of them really had for each other, and that is why Stannis ended up going to Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn ends up dying, and this is where we see even how well Littlefinger is playing the game, because people like Stannis, people like Catelyn, people like Renly, all believe this to be the Lannisters that killed Jon Arryn, right? This being either Cersei or Tyrion, and it really shows how well Littlefinger covered up what's going on with Lysa, and that's kind of what we get here towards the, end of this little part and this exchange within this meeting. Now, this is where we get to the most important part of this chapter, where Renly kind of says, he's kind of tired of this talk and of this incest and stuff like that. And he still says that, I have the bigger army, brother, and this doesn't really mean anything, right? And we get this kind of sly action where Renly goes to kind of pick something out of his pick something out of his kind of cloak, right? Or his, what he's wearing. And it almost looks like he's going to pull his sword out. So Stannis kind of pulls his sword out of his hilt and all of that, and acts like Renly and Stannis are going to fight right then and there, which is a very interesting reaction to this, because again, I don't think that would have ever happened. Now, Renly pulls out a peach. And the peach signifies a lot that we're going to talk about in the next few paragraphs and stuff that we talk about. And it's something that haunts Stannis. Now, the peach is supposed to, kind of signify the good in life, the things that you enjoy, the pleasures of life, right? For Renly, good food, right? He says this comes straight from Highgarden. Nothing tastes so good and sweet. And it's something that is very much what Renly is about. Renly is about pleasure. He's about kind of all these things that are material, that are good in life, that can help you, right? And he always focuses on that stuff and not the stuff that needs to be done, right? Not the dutiful stuff, not the honorable stuff. And Stannis is quite the opposite of Renly, where he doesn't have a peach in his life, right? He doesn't have a lot of enjoyment in his life, and he hasn't even felt like he's had a lot of control over his life, as it's been really him doing stuff for other people in his life, like his brother Robert. And now that he has, this duty, Stannis almost doesn't even really want to be king, right? He doesn't want to do a lot of this stuff because that's just, you know, it's what he has to do. It's his duty to kind of defend his house's honor against the Lannisters, who have stained the Baratheon name almost based upon they fooled Robert for a lot of years, and all these children aren't Baratheons at all, and have kind of usurped the Baratheon power. So when you look at it from that regard, that's kind of what the Peach kind of, you know, it's kind of a representation of what Renly is as a person in this Peach. And it's something we get constantly over and over again in Stannis, you know, chapters where you have Davos being the POV, where you have Stannis just keeps saying, I'm haunted by that Peach of Renly's and all that stuff. And it's very telling, and it's one of the biggest things that helps kind of, for us as the readers, understand what each of these characters are about. Now, what I think is interesting when we have this continued talk about the Peach and all that is that there's other things thrown into here to give us kind of some background information into what was really going on before the main series and stuff like that, where we have Catelyn saying, you know, we need to just hammer out an alliance and all that stuff, and Renly and Stannis just aren't going to agree on this. Catelyn continues to be kind of the voice of reason in this chapter, which is something very odd because in a lot of ways she's probably the worst player in political stuff out of the three people here that are like the main figureheads. So it's very interesting that she is the one really that is kind of being the reasonable one here. But again, and Renly goes, you know, if you want Storm's End so bad, you can keep it. You can, you know, do all this stuff, right? And Stannis, we just know he's not going to accept this, right? Stannis is someone that is very hell-bent that he is to be the king now. It is his right. It's his duty. And this is what he's kind of been doing his whole life, is what Renly should be doing for him, what he did for Robert. And it's something that is interesting because we also talk about the marriage between Marjorie and Renly directly after this, where Stannis kind of knows that this whole wedding is kind of, it's not true. It's really just an alliance between two houses, right? But Renly isn't really attracted to women, and Stannis kind of pokes fun at that in this chapter. And we also know that, which is interesting, is that Renly was actually plotting to put Marjorie as the queen with Robert over Cersei. Now, what's interesting is, why would Renly be doing this if he didn't know that Cersei was false? That Cersei had been doing this stuff with Jaime. So this is why I tend to believe that Renly did know about Cersei and Jaime's relationship, that the children were bastards and all that stuff, just based upon the fact that he is trying to get Marjorie to become the queen and all that. And again, the Tyrells are definitely kind of using some manipulation with Renly, but it also makes sense from the Baratheon side to have the Tyrell power if they were ever going to depose the Lannisters. So for me, it's a really good political maneuver by Renly, and it kind of shows you how good he is at making alliances and becoming kind of a political figurehead and stuff like that. So I just wanted to point that out in this chapter, that Renly definitely probably knew about them being together with Cersei and Jaime, and I feel like we should know that anyway, just based upon how good and politically savvy he was in King's Landing at times. So for me, I just wanted to point that out in this chapter. And Renly, as we know, is continuing to kind of taunt Stannis in this chapter, and he comes right back. He claps back going, Stannis, you want to talk about my wedding? Let's talk about yours. If my wife looked like that, I would also have patch face, basically servicing my wife, in that regard and all that. And that, Stannis doesn't really have any children besides Shireen, and Shireen is kind of, disformed and all that stuff. So Stannis at this point is just pissed. Like, he gets his sword out. He's ready to just go at Renly at this point. Catelyn's like, put your sword away. And it's just, when you're looking at it from a point of view of Cersei or any of the Lannisters at this point, they would be laughing so much. Could you think about Tyrion seeing this and just being like, these guys are morons? But it's just that stark difference between two characters. And what we get out of this is Stannis goes, Renly, for the love I bore our mother and stuff like that, if you strike your banners and come to me for a night and all that stuff, then I will give you Storm's End. I will grant you your old seat on the small council, and he will even name you his heir. Now, to be fair, Stannis is the only character in this chapter that really gives a good offer to Renly, or either one. Renly never really gives Stannis a good offer, and it makes sense from Renly's point of view of he controls the power in the situation. He has more soldiers. He has, all this stuff. He even controls Storm's End at this point. It makes sense from that point of view, but when you look at it from being just logically, Stannis is the only person. Like, this makes complete sense. Renly should get Storm's End. That makes sense. He becomes the heir as well, which puts you in another really big point of power. And with Stannis, where he hasn't been able to have children, most likely Renly would have actually inherited the crown anyway. So in my opinion, this is a very good offer from Stannis to try and make peace in this type of situation. So for me, it's a really good offer. We know it's not going to happen. Renly he has more power at this point, and he believes that he can win and all that stuff. And Renly kind of just starts to talk about, I have more men than you, Stannis. Like, why would I do that? Right? I have all these Tyrell forces, the Tarleys, the Rowans. I have all these forces. Why would I give them to you when I have over 10 times the amount of men you have? So we see kind of all that, and we see this kind of meeting start to conclude a little bit, but it's just very unfortunate that this meeting never worked out. So the meeting concludes, and Melisandre kind of just goes to Renly, look to your sins and all that stuff, and we know what's going to happen there. So we're not going to talk about that, but Renly kind of leaves and is just sitting here just pleased with himself. He's like, yeah, I just put Stannis in his place, I just taunted him and stuff, and talking about how he never really liked Stannis that much, and it's tragic that these brothers really, none of the three are really close, right? Renly was closer to Robert than he was ever to Stannis, and even then they weren't really close either. But we see that Renly kind of believes that he would be the best king, where Robert was someone that was not a good king. He didn't want to be king. He would prefer to be a warrior and stuff like that. And Stannis is someone that is not great at making allies, not great at a political kind of person and stuff like that. And Renly believes that he will be a great king. He has all these great qualities. And I can't even deny that I think Renly would have been a good king. I think he just doesn't take things as seriously as they needed to be taken. And I think some of his flaws when it comes to military leadership and stuff like that would not have made him the perfect king, but I do think he would have been a very good king as well. And Catelyn really just kind of has a sour sorrow kind of feel to her, where she understands that this is not good, right? This could have been a good alliance. Renly and Stannis together, if they had been united, would be an unstoppable combo. Renly would be able to do all the political stuff and would be able to get allies for Stannis and do all the stuff, while Stannis could be this person that's a very good military commander, could just take control of the army and stuff like that. The two of them combined would be a perfect combo. Could you imagine Randyll Tarly and Stannis commanding the army? It would be an unstoppable force. And Catelyn kind of gives us that feeling of dread, right? It's something I talked about in my Red Wedding analysis chapters. If you haven't seen those, I would definitely do that. I made a chapter, or I did a video where I did the setup chapter to the Red Wedding, and then I did the actual Red Wedding. You get that kind of feeling at the back end of this chapter as well, when you'll lead into the next chapter where Renly will end up dying. You definitely get that feeling that something is kind of not right, and just that kind of feeling of dread. Now, eventually, Renly does listen to the counsel of Randyll Tarly. Now, this is one of the few times I actually believe Randyll Tarly is wrong in the story, because Randyll Tarly suggests that we should kill Stannis now. He's only going to grow stronger and all that stuff. And I very much disagree, because he's saying that, Renly's, forces will diminish, fighting the Lannisters, while Stannis's will only grow stronger. This just isn't the case, right? Stannis does not have the food and stuff to be in a siege for that long with Storm's End. He is very much in a losing battle, right? And we're going from the point of view that they don't know Melisandre has this type of magic that she could kill, people like Renly and stuff. So when you look at it from that point of view, right, it doesn't make really any sense to actually take the battle with Stannis. It doesn't gain you anything. And Renly is not going to lose a ton of forces, right? King's Landing, with the amount of forces that Renly had, would be fairly easy to take. I get it, Tyrion is clever, but think about how easily Stannis still would have won King's Landing with only like a good, 30,000 troops. At this point, Renly has, we're told, almost 100,000 men, right? There would not have been a competition. And Tywin would not have been able to help either, because the only reason he did that was because of the Tyrell support in the main story. So, in my opinion, this is a very actually ignorant statement from Randall Tarley, because what is Stannis going to do? To gain more people to his side, he needs to show that he can legitimately stand up to Renly, and he can't. He can't take Storm's End. He is not going to be able to beat Renly in open combat. So in all regards, Renly does not need to defeat Stannis. And if anything, becoming a king's or a kinslayer, right, is also even a worse smear to your name. So I think Renly, by all rights, should just leave. He should just leave, let Stannis have his little siege, and just leave. Now, Catelyn, after hearing that Renly is going to go to war on Stannis and all that, just says, can I leave, right? There's no point in me being here anymore. I was an envoy and all that stuff. I don't need to be here anymore. And Renly goes, no. He almost wants to boast that he's going to beat Stannis and wants to show Catelyn what happens to rebels. Because there's almost another slight kind of threat to Robb that Renly will come after Robb too if he doesn't bend the knee. And you kind of see that in Catelyn's mind, where she almost thinks about how stupid Renly is kind of being in this one particular situation. Whereas Robb, who was someone that was very good at military and was also bad at politics, we kind of see how Catelyn almost doesn't understand certain things, because at this point Robb still was on an upswing, right? He wasn't losing a lot of power and stuff like that. But it's interesting to see how harsh she is on Renly when Robb is going to make far worse decisions and is also going to make a lot of mistakes, and she still doesn't really see that in Robb later on in the story. But Catelyn is basically, okay, she has to stay here, and she kind of asks to go pray. And Renly grants this, and the chapter kind of ends with Catelyn just in a state of almost, she can't do anything, right? There's nothing she can do now to prevent this. She just has to sit here and watch. And she just says, we're going to go pray and just hope this doesn't happen. And that's kind of her plan at this point. So that's how the chapter ends. And I hope you guys liked this video. Let me know if you guys have some other chapter you want me to do. This is probably the longest chapter review I've ever done. There was just a lot that goes into this chapter when it comes to building characters like Stannis, Renly, even Catelyn to a degree in this chapter, and kind of talking about two conflicting ideologies and a lot of that type of stuff. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.